If you've ever been praised in public and torn apart in private, stay with me. If you've ever been told you were too much right after doing everything right, this story is for you. And if you've ever questioned your sanity because the person blocking you kept smiling while doing it, then you'll understand exactly why I'm telling this. Before I even begin, please subscribe. Not because I'm chasing numbers, but because telling these stories takes something out of me, and knowing you're listening gives me the push to keep going. These aren't motivational speeches. They're real. They're messy. And if you've lived through something similar, comment below on your experience and you'll feel seen here. Yes, my boss called it feedback, but it was really jealousy. I didn't know that at first. At first, I thought I was lucky. I got the job during a time when everyone around me was struggling to stay employed. It wasn't flashy, but it paid well, and the company had a reputation for being stable. The interview process was intense. Multiple rounds, case studies, panel interviews. When they finally called to offer me the position, I cried in my car before answering. My boss, Pierce, was one of the reasons I accepted. He came across as polished, articulate, and calm. Mid-40s, well-respected, the kind of manager who spoke about developing talent and building leaders. During onboarding, he told me he liked hiring people who could eventually outgrow him. I believed him. The first few months were a blur of learning systems, understanding politics, and proving I belonged there. I worked harder than I ever had. I asked questions. I stayed late when needed. I delivered early when I could. Slowly, my name started coming up in meetings I wasn't even in. Clients noticed. Senior leadership noticed. And eventually, Pierce noticed too. That's when the feedback started. At first, it sounded reasonable. Encouraging, even. "You're doing well," he'd say during our one-on-ones. "I just want to help you refine your approach." I appreciated it. I really did. I took notes. I adjusted. I assumed he wanted the best for me. But something strange happened. The better my results got, the more complicated his feedback became. When I exceeded my targets, he told me I needed to be more humble. When a client praised my confidence, he said I might be coming across as aggressive. When leadership complimented my initiative, he warned me about stepping on toes. None of it was written down at first. Just conversations, soft words, gentle warnings. He always framed it the same way. "I'm telling you this because I care about your growth." So I listened. I was one of only 2 women on a team of 12. The only woman under 30. The only one consistently outperforming projections. I didn't think of that as a threat. I thought of it as proof that hard work paid off. I was wrong. The first time I felt something was off was during a quarterly review meeting. Leadership was present. Numbers were shared. My name came up more than once. One executive even said, "We should be finding ways to replicate what she's doing." I glanced at Pierce. He smiled, but it wasn't the smile I'd seen before. It was tight, controlled, the kind of smile that disappears the second no one's looking. Later that day, he asked me to step into his office. He closed the door and leaned back in his chair. "You did well in there," he said, "but I want to talk about how you present yourself." That confused me. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You tend to dominate the room," he replied. "It can make others feel uncomfortable." This was news to me. No one had ever said that before. In fact, I'd been told the opposite. "I was responding to questions," I said carefully. "I know," he said. "I'm just giving you feedback." That word again. Feedback. I nodded. I wrote it down. I adjusted. Over the next few weeks, the pattern became clearer. Praise in public, corrections in private. Always vague, always subjective, always impossible to disprove. You need to be more collaborative. You need to slow down. You need to soften your delivery. Meanwhile, my male coworkers were being applauded for being decisive, assertive, bold. I tried not to think about it. I focused on my work. I doubled down. That's when things escalated. Pierce started inserting himself into my projects more aggressively. He asked to be copied on emails that didn't concern him. He questioned decisions I'd already cleared. He reassigned parts of my work to others to give them exposure. When I asked why, he said it was about team balance. When I pushed back gently, he reminded me that he was just offering guidance. I don't want you to develop bad habits, he said. Bad habits, like succeeding without permission. Then came the first official performance document. It was a mid-year check-in. Standard procedure, he said. But when I read it, I barely recognized myself. Strong technical skills. Needs improvement in interpersonal dynamics. Can be resistant to feedback. Resistant. I stared at that word for a long time. I asked him where that was coming from. You tend to explain yourself instead of listening, he replied. I'm just trying to understand, I said. That's what I mean, he said calmly. It was subtle, almost impressive. Every attempt to defend myself became proof of the problem he was describing. I signed the document because I didn't know what else to do. After that, the tone shifted. Meetings that used to be collaborative turned cold. Decisions I used to make autonomously now required approval. Opportunities started bypassing me. And always there was feedback. You're doing fine, he'd say. But that word followed me everywhere. But you need to watch your tone. But you need to be more patient. But you're not quite ready. I started hearing it in my head even when he wasn't around. I watched coworkers with lower numbers get promoted because they were easy to work with. I watched my ideas get presented by other people. I watched Pierce take credit for initiatives I'd built from scratch. And still he smiled. To everyone else, he was the supportive manager dealing with a difficult employee. To me, he was slowly tightening a box around my career. The moment I realized this wasn't about improvement came during client call. The client praised my work directly, said they wanted me on all future projects, said I'd restored their confidence in the company. Pierce jumped in before I could respond. She's still learning, he said with a laugh, but we're getting her there. Something in me snapped then, not loudly, quietly, because I finally saw it. My growth wasn't the problem. My confidence wasn't the problem. My performance wasn't the problem. The problem was that I was shining in a space where he was used to being the brightest. And from that moment on, I stopped trying to please him. I started paying attention instead. I noticed how his feedback changed depending on who was watching. I noticed how he documented conversations differently than they happened. I noticed how he positioned himself as the gatekeeper to every opportunity. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I did something else. I started keeping records, emails, meeting notes, timeline entries. Nothing dramatic. Just facts, dates, words, decisions. Because whether I knew it then or not, I was preparing for something bigger. And Pierce had no idea what was coming. I didn't tell anyone I was keeping records. Not my coworkers. Not my friends. Not even myself, really. I framed it as being organized. Careful. Professional. But deep down, I knew it was something else. It was instinct. The kind you develop when the ground beneath you starts shifting and no one else seems to notice. Pierce, meanwhile, grew more comfortable. That was the strange thing. The more he tightened control, the more relaxed he became around me, like someone who believed the outcome was already decided. He stopped pretending to be overly supportive and leaned fully into being honest. You have potential, he said during one meeting, tapping his pen against my review file. But potential only matters if you're coachable. I asked him what he meant by coachable. He smiled. You'll get there. That answer told me everything and nothing at the same time. It was his favorite move. Say something just vague enough that I couldn't challenge it, but heavy enough that it stayed with me all day. Around that time, a new project came in. High visibility, tight timeline, leadership interest. Normally, this would have gone to me automatically. Instead, Pierce assigned it to Mark, one of my coworkers who had been struggling to hit his numbers for months. Mark came to me privately afterward. Hey, he said, almost apologetic. Pierce said you were okay with me leading this. I looked at him. Did he? Yeah. He said you wanted to focus on developing softer skills. There it was again. Softer. Always softer. I didn't correct Mark. I didn't want to put him in the middle. I just nodded and said I was happy to support. Support turned into doing most of the work behind the scenes. I drafted plans. I handled client communication. I solved problems as they came up. Mark presented the updates. Pierce praised the teamwork. In meetings, Pierce would say things like, "This is a great example of collaboration," while looking directly at me, as if daring me to disagree. I started noticing how often he spoke for me. If I opened my mouth, he finished my sentence. If I made a suggestion, he reframed it. If someone asked me a question, he answered it first. And every time, it came wrapped in a compliment. She's very passionate. She means well. She's learning how to navigate these environments. I wasn't learning. I was being managed into silence. What made it worse was how convincing it all looked from the outside. Pierce never raised his voice, never criticized me publicly, never left a paper trail that screamed misconduct. Instead, he planted seeds. He'd casually mention to others that I was still adjusting. He'd joke about my intensity. He'd frame my confidence as something that needed polishing. And because he was respected, people believed him. I started feeling it in subtle ways. Coworkers stopped asking for my input as often. Meetings happened without me. Decisions were made before I was looped in. One afternoon, I overheard 2 colleagues talking near the break room. "She's good," one of them said. "Yeah," the other replied, "but she's kind of hard to work with." I froze. They didn't know I was there. They weren't being cruel. They were just repeating a narrative they'd been given. That was the moment it stopped being just about my job. It was about my reputation. I confronted Pierce later that week. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Calm. Direct. "I feel like I'm being sidelined," I said. "And I don't understand why." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "This is exactly what I mean," he said. "You take things personally." "I'm asking for clarity," I replied. "And I'm giving you feedback," he said. "But you're resisting it." There it was again. Resistance. A word that turned any boundary into a flaw. After that conversation, things got colder. He stopped scheduling regular one-on-ones. When I asked for time, he said his calendar was tight. When I sent updates, he responded with one-word acknowledgments. When I raised concerns, he said we'd discuss them later. Later never came. Instead, HR entered the picture. I received an email requesting a meeting to discuss development goals. The wording was polite, neutral, non-threatening. Pierce was CC'd. In the meeting, the HR representative smiled warmly and asked how I was finding my role. I answered honestly but carefully. I talked about workload, growth, wanting clearer expectations. Then Pierce spoke. "She's incredibly capable," he said, "but she struggles with feedback. We're working on that." I looked at him. "In what way?" I asked. HR turned to me, curious. Pierce shrugged. "She tends to push back instead of reflecting." That was a lie. A clean one. Simple. Hard to disprove. I felt something then. Not panic. Not anger. Recognition. This wasn't going to resolve itself. After that meeting, I went home and opened a document I'd been quietly updating for months. I added details, dates, quotes, patterns. I started backing up emails, saving calendar invites, writing summaries of conversations immediately after they happened. I didn't do it out of revenge. I did it out of survival. Meanwhile, Pierce grew bolder. He began excluding me from client calls I'd built relationships with. He reassigned tasks without explanation. He questioned my time management despite approving my schedule. Once, he criticized me for not taking initiative on a project he'd never told me about. When I pointed that out, he said, "You should have anticipated it." The rules changed depending on what he needed them to be. I watched him do things he warned me against. Interrupt others. Take credit. Dismiss ideas. But when he did it, it was leadership. When I did it, it was a problem. And still he called it feedback. I started noticing something else too. His insecurity. Whenever senior leadership praised me, he redirected the conversation. Whenever my name came up positively, he added a qualifier. Whenever someone suggested I lead something, he hesitated. Once, during a leadership meeting I was invited to attend, an executive asked me directly about my career goals. Before I could answer, Pierce laughed. "She's ambitious," he said. "We're working on aligning that ambition with the team." The executive raised an eyebrow. "Ambition isn't a bad thing," she said. Pierce smiled. "Of course not." But I saw it then. Clear as day. He didn't hate me because I was difficult. He didn't undermine me because I was flawed. He hated me because I didn't need him the way he needed to be needed. And people like that don't change. They escalate. The breaking point came quietly. An internal role opened up. A promotion, technically lateral but with visibility and a direct line to leadership. I was qualified. More than qualified. I applied. Pierce called me into his office the next day. "I wish you'd talk to me first," he said. "I didn't think I needed permission," I replied. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I just don't think you're ready," he said. "Based on what?" I asked. He leaned back. Feedback. That was the moment I realized I had two options. Shrink or prepare. And this time I chose preparation. Once I made the decision to stop shrinking, everything felt clearer. Not easier, just clearer. The confusion lifted. The second-guessing slowed down. I stopped asking myself whether I was overreacting and started asking a more useful question. What does this pattern lead to if I let it continue? The answer wasn't good. People like Pierce don't suddenly wake up and become fair. They don't have a moment of self-awareness where they admit insecurity and change course. They protect their position, and when they feel threatened, they don't back off. They double down. So I did the same. I didn't confront him again. I didn't vent to coworkers. I didn't make emotional moves. I stayed professional, calm, predictable. On the surface, I became exactly what he wanted me to be, quietly compliant. Underneath, I became strategic. I stopped relying on verbal agreements. Everything went through email. If Pierce gave me feedback verbally, I followed up with a summary. If he made a decision, I asked him to confirm it in writing. I framed it as wanting clarity. He didn't push back. In fact, he seemed pleased. Probably thought I was finally learning. I also started building relationships he couldn't control. Before, most of my interactions with senior leadership went through him. That changed. I volunteered for cross-functional projects. I attended optional meetings. I made myself visible without being loud. I asked questions. I delivered results. I let my work speak for itself. Some people noticed. One of them was Lisa. Lisa worked in a different department, but our roles overlapped. She was sharp, experienced, and well-respected. During a joint project, we ended up working closely. One afternoon, after a meeting Pierce wasn't in, she pulled me aside. "You okay?" she asked. It caught me off guard. "Why do you ask?" I said. She hesitated. "You're good at what you do, but the way he talks about you doesn't match the work I see." I didn't unload everything. I just nodded. "That's kind of you to say," I replied. She smiled. "Just letting you know you're not imagining things." That mattered more than she knew. From then on, I paid attention to how others responded when Pierce wasn't around. The difference was obvious. People asked for my input, trusted my judgment, valued my follow-through. The problem wasn't me. Pierce, however, seemed to sense the shift. He started requesting more frequent updates, asked to be CC'd on everything again, wanted to approve minor decisions. It was control disguised as involvement. One afternoon, he sent me a meeting invite titled Performance Alignment. HR was included. I knew what that meant. This time I walked in prepared. Pierce spoke first, as always. "We've seen improvement," he said, "but there are still concerns." HR nodded encouragingly at me. "We just want to make sure everyone's on the same page." Pierce listed vague issues. Tone, perception, resistance, all the usual hits. When he finished, I spoke. "I'd like to understand how these concerns are being measured," I said calmly, "because my performance metrics have consistently exceeded targets, and I haven't received any direct complaints." There was a pause. Pierce cleared his throat. "It's not always measurable." "I understand," I replied. "That's why I've been asking for specific examples." HR looked at him. "Do you have some?" Pierce hesitated. He mentioned a meeting from weeks earlier. I opened my notebook. "Are you referring to the meeting on March 12th?" I asked, because I followed up after that meeting and received confirmation that my approach was aligned. I slid a printed email across the table. Silence. Pierce recovered quickly. He always did. "This is exactly what I mean," he said. "She comes in prepared to defend herself." "I'm coming prepared to understand expectations," I said. "Those are different things." HR glanced between us. "We'll take this under advisement," she said. The meeting ended without resolution, but something shifted. Pierce was careful after that. Less direct, more subtle. That's when the isolation started. I was removed from a recurring meeting without explanation. A project I'd been leading was reassigned. Information stopped flowing. I asked Pierce about it. "It's temporary," he said. "We're just rebalancing." I asked HR. "Your manager has discretion," they replied. That's when I realized how protected he was. Pierce had been there for over a decade. He'd helped build the team. He had allies, social capital, history. I had performance. That was it. But performance, when documented properly, can be powerful. I kept going. I continued delivering high-quality work even when it wasn't acknowledged. I maintained professionalism even when he didn't. I stayed calm even when he tried to provoke me. And he did try. Once, he criticized me in a team meeting. Not harshly, just enough to undermine. "I think we need to revisit expectations," he said, looking at me. "Some people are still struggling to adapt." I didn't respond. I waited. After the meeting, 2 coworkers messaged me privately. "You didn't deserve that." "He does that a lot." That was new. People were noticing. Pierce felt it too. He called me into his office later that week. "I'm concerned," he said. "You seem disengaged." "I'm focused," I replied. "Your attitude has changed." "My work hasn't," I said. He studied me for a moment. Then he smiled. "I just want to help you succeed," he said. That line used to work on me. Not anymore. Because now I understood something important. Feedback is meant to develop. Control is meant to limit. And jealousy often hides behind concern. Pierce wasn't mentoring me. He was managing his own fear. And the closer I got to exposing that, the more dangerous the situation became. I didn't know it then, but he was already setting up his next move, and it was bigger than anything he'd tried before. Pierce's next move didn't come with a warning. It came dressed as opportunity. He emailed me late on a Thursday afternoon, copying HR and one of the senior directors. The subject line was neutral enough to lower my guard. Role alignment discussion. In the email, he wrote that leadership wanted to better position my strengths and suggested a temporary shift in responsibilities. Temporary was bolded. So was development. Anyone reading it would think I was being supported. I read it 3 times before responding. "Happy to discuss," I wrote. Nothing more. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. I spent the weekend reviewing my records. Not because I expected a confrontation, but because I'd learned never to walk into a room with Pierce unprepared. Monday came. The senior director joined virtually. HR was there in person. Pierce sat across from me, relaxed, hands folded, already confident in how this would go. He spoke first. "We've been evaluating team dynamics," he said, "and we think it might be beneficial for you to step back from some client-facing responsibilities for now." "For now?" I asked. "Yes," he said smoothly. "So you can focus on internal processes and professional development." The director nodded along. HR smiled. I waited. What prompted this evaluation? I asked. Pierce answered quickly. "Feedback." There it was again. "From whom?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough to be noticeable. "Various sources," he said. "It's about perception." I looked at the director. "Have there been complaints about my client work?" The director shook her head. "Not that I'm aware of." Pierce jumped in. "This isn't punitive," he said. "It's strategic." I nodded slowly. "Will this affect my eligibility for advancement?" Silence. HR cleared her throat. "It could impact timelines," she said carefully. That was the answer. They weren't aligning my role. They were parking me. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. "I understand," I said. "Can I get this in writing, including the goals and duration?" Pierce smiled. "Of course." The meeting ended politely, cordially, like nothing significant had happened. But everything had. Over the next few weeks, my role shrank. I was removed from client calls. My access to certain systems was restricted. Projects I'd led were reassigned permanently. New responsibilities were vague and disconnected from growth. When I asked for clarity, Pierce told me to trust the process. So I trusted my documentation instead. I noticed how quickly the narrative shifted. People stopped seeing me as a top performer and started seeing me as someone being worked with, someone under development, someone with issues. Pierce had effectively reframed my story without ever saying anything overtly negative. And he did it with institutional support. That's when I stopped hoping for fairness and started planning an exit. But not quietly. I began exploring internal transfers, roles outside Pierce's control, departments that valued my skill set, positions that reported to leadership he didn't influence. I didn't tell him. At the same time, I kept delivering. Even in a reduced role, my output was strong. I sent regular updates. I documented milestones. I asked for feedback in writing. Pierce responded less and less. Then, one afternoon, Lisa stopped by my desk. "They posted an opening in our group," she said quietly. "You should apply." I looked at her. Would Pierce have to approve? She hesitated. He'd be informed. That was the risk. I applied anyway. 2 days later, Pierce called me into his office. "I heard you applied for a transfer," he said. "Yes," I replied. His tone changed. Sharper. Less polished. "I thought we agreed you needed to focus on development," he said. "I am," I replied. "This role aligns with that." He stared at me for a moment. Then he leaned forward. "I don't think this is a good idea," he said. "It could reflect poorly." "On whom?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he said something that finally confirmed everything I'd suspected. "You need to understand your place here." There it was. Not my performance. Not my attitude. My place. I nodded. "Thank you for your honesty." He looked confused. Probably expected resistance. Emotion. Fear. He got none. The interview process moved faster than expected. The hiring manager knew my work. Leadership supported the move. Pierce was asked for feedback. He gave it. I didn't know exactly what he said, but I saw the effect. The process stalled. Questions surfaced. Concerns were raised. The offer didn't come. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted the role desperately, but because it confirmed how far his reach extended. Pierce had successfully blocked my exit. That's when I made the hardest decision of all. I stopped trying to maneuver around him. I prepared to confront the system. I requested a formal review of my role change. I asked HR to evaluate the consistency between my performance metrics and the actions taken against me. I submitted documentation. Carefully. Professionally. HR acknowledged receipt. Weeks passed. Pierce avoided me. Then the meeting invite arrived. This time, leadership was included. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't walking in alone. The meeting was scheduled for 90 minutes. That alone told me it wasn't routine. 3 senior leaders were on the invite. HR, legal. Pierce. I didn't celebrate when I saw the list. I didn't feel relieved either. What I felt was steady. Focused. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about making the truth unavoidable. I walked in with a folder. Not thick. Not dramatic. Just organized. Pierce was already there, chatting comfortably with one of the directors. He looked relaxed, confident, like someone who believed the room would bend in his favor, the way it always had. When I sat down, he gave me a polite nod. Professional, almost friendly. The meeting started with HR setting expectations. This was a review of concerns raised regarding role alignment, performance management, and internal process consistency. Pierce spoke first. He always did. He talked about coaching, about investing time, about trying to help me grow. He described me as talented but challenging, capable but resistant, ambitious but misaligned. He said it calmly, smoothly, like someone reciting a version of events he'd rehearsed many times. When he finished, HR turned to me. I didn't rush. I'd like to walk through the timeline, I said. I didn't accuse. I didn't interrupt. I didn't challenge his character. I challenged the facts. I started with my hiring, my onboarding goals, my performance metrics. I showed how my targets increased quarter after quarter, how client satisfaction scores improved, how leadership feedback had been consistently positive. Then I moved to the feedback. I read excerpts from emails, notes from meetings, summaries I'd sent after conversations, not interpretations, words. I pointed out inconsistencies, how the same behaviors praised in others were flagged as issues when I displayed them, how concerns were never documented until after specific wins, how role changes occurred immediately following recognition from leadership. The room grew quieter. Pierce shifted in his seat. I continued. I showed how responsibilities were removed without clear criteria, how development plans lacked measurable goals, how access was restricted without explanation. Then I reached the part that changed everything. I shared a comparison. 2 employees, same role, similar tenure, different outcomes. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. I showed performance numbers, promotion timelines, feedback language. The difference was clear. One was being prepared for advancement. The other was being managed downward. The only thing that separated us wasn't output. It was visibility. HR asked Pierce to respond. He tried to reframe. Said context mattered. Said leadership style was subjective. Said perception was important. One of the directors interrupted him. Why wasn't this documented earlier? She asked. Pierce paused. We addressed things informally. And why did the role change happen without a written plan? Another leader asked. He hesitated again. Legal asked a question next. Quiet. Precise. Can you explain why her access was reduced despite no documented performance issues? Pierce looked at me then. Really looked at me. For the first time, he didn't smile. I was exercising managerial discretion, he said. That was the wrong answer. The meeting ended without conclusions. But something fundamental had shifted. Pierce no longer controlled the narrative. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. HR requested additional documentation. Leadership conducted independent interviews. People I'd never spoken to directly were suddenly being asked about my work. I didn't campaign. I didn't explain myself. I let my record speak. Pierce stopped giving me feedback altogether. He avoided eye contact, communicated only through short emails. The warmth was gone, the confidence too. Then came the decision. I was reassigned out of his reporting line. effective immediately. No announcement, no apology, just a quiet change. Pierce wasn't fired. He wasn't publicly reprimanded. People like him rarely are. But he lost something. Influence. My new manager met with me on day one. "I've reviewed your work," she said. "You should never have been sidelined." I thanked her. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Pierce and I crossed paths once after that. In the hallway. Brief. Polite. He nodded. I nodded back. Nothing else needed to be said. But here's the part people don't talk about. Even when you're proven right, the damage doesn't disappear overnight. Reputations take time to rebuild. Trust takes effort. Confidence comes back slowly. And sometimes the hardest part isn't the fight. It's accepting that the person who blocked you never truly faces consequences. But I learned something through all of this. Feedback that helps you grow feels specific, measurable, honest. Feedback meant to control you feels endless, vague, shifting. If you're constantly adjusting but never improving in their eyes, it's not about your performance. It's about their fear. And that fear can't survive daylight. Once I was out from under Pierce, people assumed the story ended there. Clean resolution. Problem solved. New manager. Fresh start. That's not how it works. The transfer changed my reporting line, but it didn't erase the months of narrative that had already been planted. People remembered the version of me they'd been given, the one who needed coaching, the one who struggled with feedback, the one who was intense. No one said it out loud, but I could feel it in small ways. Conversations that stopped when I walked in. Invitations that didn't come. People choosing safer topics around me. I didn't blame them. Office reputations spread faster than facts. My new manager, Rachel, was different from Pierce in every way. Direct, transparent, uninterested in power games. In our first one-on-one, she asked me a simple question. "What do you want to do here?" No one had asked me that in a long time. I told her the truth. Not the polished version. Not the ambitious soundbite. I want to do good work without feeling like I'm being managed for someone else's comfort. She nodded. That's reasonable. We set clear goals. Measurable ones. Deadlines. Ownership. No ambiguity. Within weeks, the difference was obvious. My work moved faster. Decisions were cleaner. Feedback actually helped. Rachel gave feedback the way it's supposed to be given. Specific, timely, balanced. When something didn't work, she said why. When something did, she acknowledged it. No mind games. No hidden meanings. But even in a healthier environment, the past lingered. One afternoon, a senior leader pulled me aside after a meeting. "You're doing well," she said. "I'm glad things worked out." That phrase stuck with me. Worked out. As if the outcome had been luck. Timing. A favor. Not documentation. Not persistence. Not truth. I smiled and thanked her. But inside, I understood something important. Systems don't correct themselves. They respond to pressure. And pressure comes from people who refuse to quietly disappear. Over time, my reputation began to shift again. Slowly, people saw my work firsthand. They formed their own opinions. The old labels faded. Pierce, meanwhile, stayed where he was. We didn't interact often, but I heard things. Comments. Whispers. He was quieter in meetings. Less dominant. More cautious. Leadership watched him more closely now. He hadn't been punished, but he'd been exposed. And for someone like him, that was enough to change behavior. Months later, I was asked to mentor a new hire. She was talented, confident, young. During one of our conversations, she hesitated before asking a question. "Can I ask you something kind of personal?" she said. "Sure," I replied. "How do you deal with feedback that feels off?" she asked. "Like it's not really about the work." I looked at her, really looked, and I realized something. This story wasn't just about me. It was about how often feedback is used as a weapon. especially against women, especially against people who don't fit neatly into someone else's comfort zone. I told her what I wish someone had told me earlier. If feedback is real, it helps you improve something specific. If it's vague, moving, and always about who you are instead of what you did, pay attention. She nodded slowly. I think that's happening to me, she said. And just like that, I saw how easily this cycle repeats. That's why I'm telling this story. Not because I won, not because he lost, but because too many people think they're alone when this happens. You start doubting yourself. You overcorrect. You shrink. You try harder. And somehow it's never enough. That's not growth. That's control. The truth is, people who call their insecurity feedback rarely stop until they're forced to. And the system doesn't protect you automatically. You have to make the pattern visible. You have to document. You have to stay grounded. And you have to decide when silence costs more than speaking up. Looking back, there were moments I almost quit. Moments I considered leaving without saying anything. Moments where walking away quietly felt easier. But walking away would have meant carrying the lie with me. Instead, I left the lie behind. And that changed more than my job. It changed how I see authority, how I hear feedback, how I trust my own judgment. I no longer assume discomfort means I'm wrong. Sometimes it means someone else is threatened. Time has a way of softening things on the surface while sharpening them underneath. A year passed after everything settled. New projects, new rhythms, new challenges. On paper, my career looked fine. Better than fine, actually. I was respected in my new role, trusted, included, but every now and then, something small would pull me back. A comment in a meeting about being too direct. A joke about someone needing to be managed. A piece of feedback that focused more on personality than performance. Each time I felt that familiar pause. The moment where you decide whether to absorb it quietly or question it. The difference now was that I no longer questioned myself first. I'd learned how easy it is for language to shape reality. How words like difficult, intense, and resistant can follow you longer than any metric. And I'd learned how quickly those words attach themselves to women who don't stay small. One afternoon, I ran into Pierce in the elevator. It had been months since we'd spoken. Just the two of us moving between floors, polite silence. He cleared his throat. You seem to be doing well, he said. I am, I replied. There was a pause. I hope you know, he said. Everything I did was meant to help you. I looked at him, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just clarity. I believe you thought that, I said. The elevator doors opened. He didn't respond. I walked out knowing something I hadn't before. Intent doesn't cancel impact. And people who hide behind intent rarely take responsibility for the harm they cause. Later that week, I was asked to participate in a leadership roundtable. The topic was performance management, feedback culture, development. I almost declined. Then I remembered how long I'd waited for someone else to say something. During the discussion, someone mentioned the importance of tough feedback. I spoke up. Feedback should have a purpose, I said. If it's not helping someone improve something specific, then we should ask who it's really serving. The room went quiet. No one disagreed. Afterward, 2 colleagues pulled me aside. Both women, different departments, similar stories. One said she'd been labeled emotional. The other said she'd been told she wasn't polished enough. Neither had received clear guidance, just endless correction. I realized then how widespread this was, how normalized, how often it's framed as professionalism when it's really discomfort with confidence. That's the part that stays with you, not the meetings, not the documentation, not the outcome, the pattern. I started mentoring more intentionally, asking better questions, encouraging people to trust their instincts when something didn't sit right. And every time I heard someone say, maybe I'm just being sensitive, I felt a familiar ache. Because that sentence almost kept me stuck. If there's one thing I wish I'd understood earlier, it's this. Feedback is a tool. Like any tool, it can be used to build or to damage. When it's real, it comes with clarity. When it's manipulative, it comes with confusion. When it's about growth, it evolves. When it's about control, it repeats. Pierce never changed his script. He just changed his audience. And I stopped being one of them. The irony is, once I stopped playing the role he assigned me, the power he had over me disappeared. Not instantly, not dramatically, but completely. That's how these dynamics end. Not with explosions, with disengagement, with truth replacing narrative, with someone deciding they don't need permission to take up space. When I look back now, the strangest part isn't what Pierce did. It's how long it took me to name it, to really see it for what it was. For months, I treated every small interaction as a puzzle I had to solve, thinking that if I could just phrase things better, just work harder, just smile a little more, maybe the tension would dissipate. Maybe I could earn approval or even respect. I thought clarity was the goal, but clarity was never the goal. The goal was control, and it took me months of careful observation, documentation, and strategic patience to see the pattern. It's so subtle that when you're in it, you almost miss it entirely. Every small correction, every vague comment, every helpful suggestion that keeps looping back to your behavior instead of your work, it doesn't scream manipulation. It whispers it. It makes you question yourself. It convinces you that maybe you are the problem. And the longer it goes on, the harder it is to remember who you were before all the subtle undermining began. The thing about someone like Pierce is that he doesn't need to yell. He doesn't need to scream. He doesn't need to openly attack. That would be obvious. Anyone could see that. Instead, the undermining is quiet, carefully framed, wrapped in professional language, hidden behind feedback and development. It's structured to look like growth when it's really just a cage. And here's what I realized. When you finally see it, the anger doesn't come first. It's a deep, simmering frustration that lingers. You're frustrated that you didn't notice sooner. Frustrated that you almost blamed yourself. Frustrated at how easily someone else's insecurity manipulated the environment around you. Leaving Pierce's direct control didn't immediately erase the effects. The whispers, the small biases, the lingering assumptions, they stayed. People remembered the narrative he'd built. They remembered the idea that I was difficult or resistant to guidance. It took months for those perceptions to fade, even as my work continued to speak for itself. My new manager, Rachel, was a revelation. She didn't micromanage. She didn't try to control the narrative. She asked questions. She listened. She gave feedback that was actionable, specific, and consistent. For the first time in months, I could breathe at work without constantly second-guessing my every action. I could make a decision and know it would be judged on its results, not on how it made someone else feel. And yet, even in this healthier environment, I realized that the experience with Pierce had changed me. It sharpened my instincts. It made me hyper-aware of when feedback is meant to build you up versus when it's meant to control. It made me realize how often women, especially ambitious women, are subjected to this quiet form of manipulation disguised as concern or mentorship. One afternoon, I ran into Pierce in the elevator. It had been months since we spoke. We shared the space briefly, just the two of us, and there was that awkward silence that speaks volumes. He cleared his throat and said, "You seem to be doing well." "I am," I replied. Simple, factual, calm. No tension, no hostility, just truth. He paused, searching for something to say. Then, almost softly, he added, "I hope you know everything I did was meant to help you." I looked at him carefully, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just clarity. "I believe you thought that," I said, and I meant it. I wasn't lying. I didn't think he woke up each morning plotting to destroy me. I think he truly believed he was being helpful. But intent doesn't erase impact. And people who hide behind intent rarely take responsibility for the harm they cause. That was the final lesson, the thing that sticks. People can control narratives, manipulate perceptions, and create an environment that makes you doubt yourself. But you always have the ability to reclaim your own story. You just have to recognize it first. Later that week, I was asked to participate in a leadership roundtable. The topic: performance management, feedback culture, and professional development. I almost declined. Part of me wanted to stay invisible. Part of me wanted to avoid anyone who might bring up past issues. Then I remembered the countless hours I had spent doubting myself, wondering if I had imagined it all. I remembered the women I had seen shrink in meetings, the men who got promoted while I was sidelined, the constant battle to prove myself. I thought about the young professionals who would walk into their first jobs, never realizing how easily a toxic manager could weaponize feedback. I didn't decline. I spoke up. During the discussion, someone mentioned the importance of tough feedback. I leaned forward. Feedback should have a purpose, I said, and if it's not helping someone improve something specific, then we should ask who it's really serving. The room went quiet. That quiet wasn't hostility. It was recognition, understanding. People had seen it, experienced it, or perhaps subconsciously known it all along but had lacked the courage or words to articulate it. Afterward, 2 colleagues pulled me aside. Both women, different departments, similar stories. One had been labeled emotional for challenging a decision. Another was told she wasn't polished enough despite exceeding all expectations. Neither received concrete feedback, only endless correction, only endless questioning of their value. It hit me then just how widespread this cycle is, how normalized, how often it masquerades as professionalism when it's really discomfort with someone else's confidence. I began mentoring more intentionally. I started asking better questions, encouraging others to trust their instincts, to document, to be vigilant, to recognize when feedback is genuine and when it's a tool of control. Every time a young professional said, "Maybe I'm just being sensitive," I felt a familiar ache. That sentence almost kept me stuck for months. If there's one thing I wish I'd known sooner, it's this: feedback is a tool. Like any tool, it can be used to build, or it can be used to damage. When feedback is real, it comes with clarity. It points forward. It evolves. It helps you grow. When it's manipulative, it loops endlessly, pointing not at your work, but at your personality. It cages, it confines, it quietly undermines. Pierce never changed his script. He just changed his audience. And I stopped being one of them. That realization alone felt liberating. Not because I had one, but because I had finally stepped out of a narrative I hadn't chosen. Time gave me perspective. Months turned into a year. My career stabilized. My reputation rebuilt itself slowly, piece by piece. I became known for results, reliability, and resilience, not for the drama he tried to create. And yet I knew the system still allowed these behaviors. People like Pierce exist in every office, every industry, every level of leadership. They hide behind titles, experience, and charisma. And until someone calls the pattern out, it continues. I still remember the moment that cemented my understanding. Mentoring a new hire, a talented young woman brimming with confidence, but already wary of authority. She hesitated before asking a question. "Can I ask something kind of personal?" she said. I nodded. "How do you deal with feedback that feels off? Like it's not really about the work?" I looked at her, really looked, and I saw myself reflected in her eyes. And I knew I had to answer honestly. "If feedback is real, it helps you improve something specific," I said. "If it's vague, moving, and always about who you are instead of what you do, pay attention." She nodded slowly, understanding more than she realized. That's when I realized that my story wasn't just about me. It was about countless others, repeating patterns silently, shrinking to survive. The cycle of control, cloaked in mentorship, disguised as concern, hiding in plain sight. That's why I'm telling this story. Not because I won or he lost, but because too many people think they're alone. They overcorrect. They shrink. They adjust. And somehow, no matter how much they try, it's never enough. That's not growth. That's control. So, I want to leave you with a choice. Two perspectives. Two sides. There are people who believe that you should quietly exit these environments to protect your mental health and career, even if it means letting the pattern continue for others. And then there are people who believe you should document, expose, and stand your ground, even if it's uncomfortable, because silence is what allows toxic patterns to repeat. I don't think either side is completely wrong. Walking away quietly can be self-preservation. Speaking up can be costly, but I know the decision I made. I reached a point where staying silent felt heavier than being difficult. Once you feel that weight, you don't forget it. If you've ever been told you were too much after excelling, if you've watched your confidence reframed as a flaw, if you've ever felt yourself shrinking to make someone else comfortable, you are not imagining it. And you are definitely not alone. I want to hear from you. Which side do you believe in? Is it smarter to quietly exit and protect yourself? Or is there value in standing your ground and forcing the truth into the open, even when it's uncomfortable? Comment below. I read every single story, and your experiences matter more than you realize. If this story resonated with you, subscribe. Not just to support the channel, but so we can continue sharing real stories that don't get told in meetings or performance reviews. Some stories don't belong behind closed doors. They belong out here, where someone else can finally say, that wasn't just me, and maybe, just maybe, stop shrinking too. Because once you see the difference between feedback and control, the subtle games stop being invisible. You start noticing patterns. You start speaking up. And slowly, you reclaim not just your role, but your perspective, your confidence, and your right to take up space. This isn't just a story about a boss or a toxic office. It's about every system, every culture, every person who uses power quietly, subtly, and dangerously. It's about the ones who label ambition as resistance and visibility as threat. And it's about the people who refuse to be quiet, who refuse to be diminished, who refuse to let someone else define their worth. I'll leave you with this. The impact of manipulation doesn't end when you leave the room. It lingers in whispers, assumptions, and second-guessing. But the truth, your truth, has a power of its own. Document it, speak it, live it, and help others recognize it too. Because the more we shine a light on this, the less room there is for jealousy to masquerade as feedback. And the more space there is for all of us to grow without shrinking.